back to Troubleshooting Agile. Hi there, Jeffrey.
Hi, Squirrel. Squirrel, I have a question for you. You've mentioned to me, and you've mentioned a few times on the podcast over the years, that one of the things you like doing is having executives walk the board. And I thought today it might be a good idea for you to explain a bit more about why you have people do this. What does it even mean? And what's your version of that happening? And what is it you hope to have happen? Why do you do this? So can you explain that to us?
Absolutely, but I have to explain it kind of tangentially and by asking you some questions so that we can remind our users about our listeners, sorry, about something that many of them may know and those that don't should know in a different context. So, Jeffrey, do you know what walking the board is in general?
Well, I know it from as a software development teams, we'd have a Kanban board, and walking the board would be kind of progressing through the cards on the board. So that's what we would mean. And usually that was done maybe by the development team, often led by the Scrum Master, if you have such a thing. That's the kind of context I'm aware of this.
And the contrast is to a way of reviewing work with the team every day, which is not as effective, in my view, which is asking everybody, what are you doing? And I'm wondering if you have any memories of asking everybody what they're doing and what goes wrong with that.
Well, well, I have memories of other people asking what they're doing and watching it go wrong, and watching our quote unquote stand-ups, have everyone sit down and have them take, half an hour while people sort of talk, about random items that happen to be coming up. So that's what I saw, the effectively what became status meetings, when people were asked, what are you doing? I remember that the walking the board made it much more succinct, because it was sort of, you're very focused, who's doing this, what are you doing, move on. So that's my memory of it.
Okay, well, you have a memory that's similar to mine, and I have some other experiences that our listeners may also resonate with. So, in particular, I remember times when there was something super important to the whole company, and everybody was waiting and watching for us to get it done, and for some reason, no one was working on it. Maybe the
Oh
person who
no.
was going to be working on it was on holiday or had forgotten about it or got pulled onto something else by some executive saying it was super important, but it really wasn't. And this person should have been working on this, or if they weren't, somebody else should be, but nobody was. And we'd go through the whole stand up, and everybody would say all this cool stuff that they were doing, and it would sound really good, and I would offer some help, and on we would go. And then somebody would come to me later that day, oh my God, why haven't we, what happened to the, and I would say, oh yeah, actually nobody's working on that.
Yeah. Oh
So
no.
the principle of walking the board is that the cards come to the stand up rather than the people. I've always found that a very
Mm.
useful way of talking about it. So what you're doing is you're getting the status and the progress and, most importantly, the blockers and obstacles for all the things that you should be doing, all the things that are actually prioritized that someone has put into Jira or someplace similar. If people don't know what a Kanban board is, it's just a list of tickets that people are working through in various categories. But the point is that you can have one of those items, or many of those items, that's kind of orphaned. Nobody's working on it, so you wouldn't hear about it if you just asked, what are you working on? And you can also have, as Jeffrey said, lots of things that people are working on that are completely useless. They're not at all what someone wants them to work on. And you can get a whole lot of information about that, which wastes everybody's time. By the way, this is why it's called a stand-up, because you're supposed to stay standing up so that your feet hurt soon. It's better with people who don't have great posture, because then they terminate the stand-up sooner. But at any rate, whatever you do, you make sure that you get it done quickly and you cover the things that are actually relevant to the company. Well, guess what? Lots of leadership groups work just the same way, that they turn up. And I had a client who was doing this when I first came to them a few weeks ago. And their leadership team discussion was all about stuff that didn't matter. And
Oh.
the company had two major initiatives, maybe three major initiatives. And I listened to them discuss precisely what design work they were going to do in a completely different area for about 25 minutes. And I talked to somebody later who said, boy, I really didn't understand why we talked about that. I don't have anything to do with design. I think it's great that those people go figure that out, but why was I listening to that? And I said, I don't know, but we're going to fix it. And so what we fixed was we created a sort of board showing all the major initiatives, and certainly the 3 major company ones are right at the top. And now that meeting goes through that board, making sure that we cover all the things that the executives are trying to accomplish. Guess what? You normally have a thing like a company strategy that tells you what that should be. Maybe you have a technology strategy or marketing strategy that will tell you for those groups what they're supposed to be doing. Those would be great guides to what your team is actually working on, or rather, what they should be. And if you detect a difference, like nobody's working on thing X, or this person is working on thing Z that shouldn't be, you can correct those things. So that's why I tend, when I'm working with executives, to do the same thing I do when I'm working with individual engineers, which is to say, why don't we look at what we're supposed to do rather than what you're actually doing?
I like it. It's funny because when I heard you describe this executive walking the board, I was expecting that you were having an executive essentially go through the development board, because a lot of teams have their boards, and that would seem like to be a nice way to have accountability to the executive what's actually being worked on. But I like it even better if you're actually having the executives create a board for their work. And the thing about it, as I was talking to a client not long ago, and yeah, I'm sure, Squirrel, you remember a book called The Five Dysfunctions of a Team?
Oh, with joy, indeed. We wrote a whole book about why it was wrong. Go on.
Well, about the missing pieces. But
Yeah, exactly. That's
one
fair.
of the
Yeah.
things
So what was missing from it?
exactly, but one of the things that you and I both liked about it was it talked about one of the dysfunctions being a lack of accountability to each other, and particularly this is a problem when it's your executive team, because if your executive team has dysfunctions, those dysfunctions will cascade through the rest of the org. So I was just talking to the client about this, about the need for accountability, and that's a sign that you have a functioning team. And then talking to you, and you're saying, okay, here's how we're gonna do accountability. We're gonna have our priorities down, and then talk about the priorities. That way, people will be clear on what each other are doing for what they're supposed to be accountable for. Because for some reason that executive accountability is often really lacking, which I think is part of what leads to the kind of meandering executive conversations, which I've also witnessed, that you're describing. So I like that. And the
And we can
phrase,
find mismatches. Like if we're doing North American expansion, and you're working on marketing in Canada, and I'm working on sales in the southern United States, we're probably not working in good collaboration. So we should probably fix that.
yeah, that's right. That's right. Um, yeah, mismatches and misunderstandings, and also just distractions. I like your example you gave of developers being pulled off on special projects, because the same things happen to executives. That something comes in for a board member, or the CEO has a side project idea, and bringing it front and center in the conversation about what's actually happening, what's been the actual progress, and what's expected next. I think that's great. And I love your phrase, by the way, that it's the cards that tend to stand up. I think that's
Oh, I don't get
fantastic.
credit for that one. We should try to find that. Remind me, Jeffrey. We'll try to put that in the show notes, or if any of our listeners know which very clever agilist came up with that, that would be great. But it was somebody way back in the mists of time, back at the turn of the century. You remember that, Jeffrey? When Agile was still a new thing and nobody had ever heard of it. Somebody came up with that, and we'll try to find it.
Nice. Now, I have a question here. Do you ever encounter resistance from the executive team about creating this kind of accountability loop?
Yeah, but it tends to be more passive resistance, sort of reversion to the mean. So I've noticed that in this particular example, sometimes this group, this executive group I'm talking about in coaching, will revert, and they'll start talking about all the things they're doing. So they need a gentle reminder that there's a board over there, and we should be going through those things and making sure we're not missing any of the major initiatives. So there's a tendency among people, very natural, to want to talk about the things that they're currently doing. It's somewhat more
Right.
threatening to talk about the stuff that you're not doing that might be really important.
That's right. I like that. So yes, I think that's interesting. I can imagine this is an area where it's easy for people to start the board to create the list, especially if the CEO thinks it's a good idea. But as you say, sort of the habits of doing it are the difficult part. I know when I've put this kind of walk the board stand-up process in place with development teams, or larger, in divisions or departments, that the tendency, as you say, is for people to revert to their normal way of working. And it was very important for me to be vigilant about monitoring the conversation. And it was never a case of saying, you can't talk about that, but rather, we need to discuss the basics of the cards first, and then afterwards we can talk about all those other things. And it turned out that sometimes we would talk about those other things after the cards were done, but a lot of times it turned out, once we reviewed the cards, people suddenly decided those other things were not not as important to talk about. But it really required monitoring, and it sounds like you're finding something similar, which is, while the habit's getting established, people need the oversight. Is that right?
It certainly is. And I'm hoping that our listeners will have some stories for us about trying this kind of technique. What have you done to bring an organization more in line with your strategy? How has it worked to walk the board for you, or are you going to try it? Those are things that we would certainly like to hear about from our listeners. By the way, a really great place to talk about this and maybe even practice it would be Helsinki, right, Jeffrey?
That's right. Come out in May in Helsinki to KitCon, and you can
By the
sign
way,
up
Helsinki's
at.
in Finland, if anyone's not sure. So you have to find Finland on a map and then go there. But that's a great place to talk to, assuming I can get there, both me and Jeffrey about this kind of topic. Well, when is it again, Jeffrey?
May 22nd and 23rd. And registration is free. We do take voluntary donations. But the key thing here is this is a conference where people confer with each other, meaning it's all about talking to the other attendees. It's not a case where, sponsors have paid and therefore they will get, keynote spots. It's not a case where there's a bunch of pre-designed PowerPoints. You show up and you talk to the people about the topics you decide on Friday night, and then Saturday we have those sessions. So if there's something interesting to talk about that you'd like to discuss, come and add it to our board for KitCon, and we can vote on it and make it part of the schedule.
Jeffrey's not kidding. There's really a board. So if listeners are interested in coming to Helsinki or want to ask us more questions about it, that would be great. And we also like it when people disagree with us. So maybe you think that having a status meeting and discussing what you're doing is most valuable. That could be right. I'm just advocating this method because it helped this client and many of my others. But maybe you have a different point of view. We'd sure like to hear it. However you'd like to talk to us, or whatever you'd like to talk about, the best way to do that is to go to agileconversations.com, which is where you'll find our book, the one we wrote in response to 5 dysfunctions of a team, and conversational dojo guides and videos and lots of other stuff, all free. And of course, also lots and lots of different means of getting in touch with us. I've just been playing with Claude Code, so I'll be on OpenClaw soon, and then I'll be on the social media for Open Claws or whatever they're dreaming up this week. So you'll find lots of different ways. Email also works. There's lots of different things you can do to get in touch with us. But we'd sure like to hear from you because some of our best topics come from our listeners. Of course, the other way to keep in touch is to come back again soon, specifically next week, when we'll have another episode of Troubleshooting Agile. Thanks, Jeffrey.
Thanks, Squirrel.